100 Roman Catholic, Jewish, and Protestant faith leaders have signed and submitted a letter to Congress urging lawmakers to pass the Smarter Sentencing Act, which is currently moving through the Senate with an accompanying bill in the House. The act aims to dismantle mandatory minimum sentencing laws put in place decades ago for many low-level and nonviolent drug offenses. It all resulted in skyrocketing prison populations, reoffending rates, and massive taxpayer expense. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, as of April 2014, of the nearly 217,000 people locked up, more than 100,000 of them are serving time for drug offenses. First runner-up, 32,000 inmates doing time for weapons, explosives, and arson. A 2013 report by the Urban Institute estimates that just two of the bill's provisions could save taxpayers $3 billion over the next decade. And that doesn't take into account prison closures or even abandoning new prison building projects. In the letter, the faith leaders urge lawmakers to support the Smarter Sentencing Act, citing their belief in the inherent dignity of all people, and that for too long, Congress has ignored the consequences of the harsh sentencing policies it approved of during the 80s, and the disproportionate harm it's caused people of color and those convicted of low-level offenses. We are reminded that Scripture commands us, justice and only justice shall you pursue. Deuteronomy 16:20. Joining us to weigh in on the national conversation these numbers have sparked is Pastor Jeff Wells of the Community Methodist Church in Massapequa Park, New York. Sir, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Now, how would your role as a faith leader help to encourage passage of the Smarter Sentencing Act?
Well, Lindsay, as a faith leader, I have some influence with my congregation and, of course, within my denomination and also within my community. And so for legislators tend to listen to some extent to faith leaders who take a stand on an issue. And it's not just individual leaders either. My denomination, the United Methodist Church, has offices right across the street from the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and is continually advocating for policies that are loving and just on a whole range of social justice issues, including poverty, hunger, criminal justice, the rights of women and minorities, and others.
Now, in this bill, what specifically do you think could change things for people who have been incarcerated or face sentencing for drug crimes? How could this, what could change things the most?
Well, I actually support this bill partly because my denomination is supporting it, but more importantly because I believe that it's a small step toward dismantling what I see as a very unjust system of oppression and social control. The United States has the highest rate of incarceration in the world, and I think that's largely due to the so-called war on drugs. And the mass incarceration in the United States, of course, falls disproportionately on people of color. And so the Smart Screening Bill, or Smart Sentencing Bill, will mean fewer people sentenced to prison for low-level and nonviolent crimes, although I believe that this is only a small part of the solution.
So I see what you're saying. It's the inherent injustice of the entire process. Let's take a look at the inmates currently in federal prison. Now, most of those incarcerated are relatively young and male, many of them in their early 30s. It tapers down from there. In your opinion, as a faith leader, what are the societal effects of having this large of a number of young men in prison? I'm sure as the leader of a church, you deal with having to, rehabilitate people who have been in prison before.
Sure, and I think that actually the primary sources of assistance for people coming out of prison are in fact communities of faith. But under the current conditions, my guess would be that it would cause a large increase in the number of unemployed young men. But to me, that simply highlights the injustice that's built into the U.S. economic system and the criminal justice system. When people are released from prison, if they have committed a felony, which many of the drug crimes are, they have great difficulty finding work or housing and are usually excluded from government benefits. And so my belief is that what we need in addition to this smart sentencing law is a massive infusion of money into education, job creation, and more humane drug treatment programs.
If this bill passes and judges are allowed to give less harsh sentences and more rehabilitative measures are enacted, do you think this will help reduce the high reoffending rates that we're currently seeing in this country?
I think that the reoffending rates will go down when we have a better system of providing people with treatment, with mentoring, with alternatives to prison, and for those who are coming out of prison to change the conditions in which they have to enter back into society. The truth is that in spite of having spent $1 trillion over the past 40 years in the war on drugs, the rate of addiction has not changed. And so I think that what we need to do is provide opportunities for people to be able to overcome the things that get them into addictions in the first place, and then to be able to overcome addictions. And churches actually have been for decades one of the primary sources of that, because most of the alternatives or Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous meetings and so forth are held in churches. And in my own congregation, we're not only providing space for people to meet, but we also have a recovery ministry reaching out to people who are suffering from addictions and helping them to find their way back into productive and life, and also a life filled with faith that can give them the strength to remain free from drugs and alcohol.
All right. Thank you very much for weighing in on this very important topic for us. Pastor Jeff Wells of the Community Methodist Church in Massapequa Park, New York.
It's been a pleasure.